I didn't cry when my son called me the waitress at his party, not when the guests laughed. Not when he handed me a tray of drinks like I was part of the catering crew. No, I smiled. I smiled like a woman who had just realized her only child didn't see her as a mother anymore, but as a nuisance with a pulse. I smiled because that was the exact moment I stopped being afraid to lose him. Because I already had. They say motherhood is sacrifice, but no one tells you what to do when all that sacrifice turns invisible. I'm Clara Whitmore. I'm 64 years old. I buried my husband when I was 41. I raised my son Ethan alone, paycheck to paycheck, in a cold little cabin by Lake Torch in Michigan. That house wasn't just wood and nails. It was our whole world. I cooked soup from canned beans, turned down the thermostat to keep the bills down, and once pawned my wedding ring to afford Ethan's new cleats. He never knew. I didn't let him. He got into business school on scholarship. I cried in the car the day we dropped him off, then drove 6 hours back in silence. I spent the next 10 years sending him money on birthdays, baking pies for his visits, though they became fewer, and keeping the lake house spotless like it mattered to someone. The funny thing is, when you give everything, people stop seeing the cost. Last winter, Ethan started calling more often. He had this ambitious tone in his voice. Said he wanted to host his birthday by the lake. Said it would be nostalgic. I cleaned every window, repainted the porch, had a local boy come fix the shed door. I thought maybe, just maybe, he was starting to remember. And the morning he arrived, with a rental car full of friends in tailored suits and glossy smiles, I wore my best blouse, set out my apple pie, and stood on the porch like a woman waiting to be seen. But Ethan didn't look at the house. He didn't look at me. He looked past me, smiled, and said, "Cool." The cabin's still standing, then walked inside. I didn't say anything. Not then. But a little voice inside me whispered, "You've kept everything standing, except yourself." The music was loud. The lights were bright. The cabin looked nothing like it used to. Ethan had rented a party tent, strung lights across the backyard, and hired a catering team that wore all black with little gold pins. I brought out the apple pie anyway. It felt silly, but I did it. I walked toward him, holding the warm dish in both hands, hoping, God help me, he'd remember. Just for a second, he barely glanced. "Oh, you brought that? Just leave it in the kitchen." Then he turned back to his group like I wasn't there. A woman in a sequined dress laughed too loud beside him. Someone asked if I was part of the staff. Before I could answer, Ethan grabbed a drink tray from the bar, shoved it in my hands, and said loud enough for the whole group to hear, "Everyone, meet our waitress for the night. This is my mom. Be nice. She bites." They laughed. Hard. Like it was the funniest thing in the world. I didn't laugh. I didn't blink. I just stood there, holding the tray, the drink shaking slightly, wondering how I'd become a joke at my own family's table. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been laughed at by someone you love? Not just laughed with, but laughed at. Because let me tell you, it doesn't feel like pain. It feels like erasure. I placed the tray on a table. My hands were trembling. I made my way inside, through the kitchen, now filled with strangers. A woman tossed my pie in the trash without a second look. I slipped into the hallway, found the guest bathroom, and locked the door behind me. And that's when I heard it. Voices. Through the vent. Ethan's voice. "She'll play along. She always does." Then a woman. Carly. His girlfriend. "Once we get her on paper, it's over. No going back." A pause. "She thinks this is about a party. Let her serve drinks and smile. Just make sure she signs everything before next week." I sat on the toilet lids, staring at the tile floor. And in that moment, I didn't feel angry. Not yet. I felt gone. Like maybe they'd already erased me. They just hadn't buried the body yet. The laughter from outside faded, but their words didn't. They stayed, louder than any music. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. The sound of their voices, the words I heard through that bathroom vent, looped in my head like a scratched record. "She'll play along. She always does. Make sure she signs everything next week." It wasn't just cruelty. It was planning. It was paperwork. It was a setup. At 4:30 a.m. I made coffee. I didn't drink, and pulled out my old lockbox. Inside were the most important things I own. My birth certificate, Ethan's school awards, my husband's will, and the deed. Or at least it used to be. Because when I opened the envelope where I'd kept it for 21 years, it was empty. I froze. Checked again. Then again, nothing. Not the deed. Not the copy. Not even a photocopy of the transfer. I tore the closet apart. The filing cabinet, every envelope, every folder with yellowing tax receipts and expired coupons. Gone. By 9:00 I was on the phone with the county clerk. I gave the address of the lake house. He tapped his keyboard, then paused. It shows a title transfer, he said. 6 weeks ago, to a business entity. What business? I asked. Heart thudding. Omnicore Investments. Who signed the transfer? Another pause. Says it was notarized. Your signature. Witnessed by a David Whitmore. David. My brother. We hadn't spoken in over 10 years. I hung up without saying thank you. Just sat there in my kitchen, staring at the wall like it might explain something. So that was it. While I made casseroles and baked pies, my own son was filing me away like an old appliance, something to be used up and put away. Not even thrown out, just quietly replaced. If you've ever had someone take something from you, not with violence, but with paperwork, you know it leaves a colder bruise. Tell me, what did they take from you? I pulled the blinds shut. The lake shimmered like always, but something in me had gone dark. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I was awake now, and awake is where all the dangerous things begin. I used to think betrayal came with shouting, slamming doors, maybe a broken dish, but sometimes it just walks in smiling, with paperwork in its hand. The day after I found out about the deed, I sat at the same kitchen table I'd nursed Ethan through fevers and scraped knees. And I looked at the empty envelope like it was a wound. I kept asking myself, when did they do it? Then I remembered. Back in April, after I'd had my eye surgery, Ethan had brought over a stack of insurance forms. I was still groggy, head swimming from anesthesia. He said, just sign. Mom, standard stuff. Release forms for post-op. I didn't read them. My vision was still cloudy. I trusted him. God help me. I trusted him. I called my old friend Tessa that afternoon. She used to work in real estate law before retirement. I didn't even explain the full story. I just said, can you come by? She was at my door 40 minutes later. We sat side by side on the floor of my living room, with every file I had laid out around us like the remains of a house fire. She found it first. An email from Clara, Ethan's girlfriend, dated the same week as my surgery. Subject line, documents for review. The attachments, labeled innocently, medical addendums and family trust updates. Tessa opened one, froze, then said, this isn't an update, this is a deed transfer. I stared at the screen, at my own name, typed neatly next to a scanned signature. Mine. But it wasn't. It was me, without my eyes open, without protection, without knowing. And suddenly, I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was clear that they didn't just take my house. They took advantage of my recovery, my trust. And every year I spent putting Ethan first. They planned it. And now I would, too. I didn't raise my voice. I raised a folder. And I started writing down everything I remembered. Because if they wanted a paper trail, I'd give them one. But this time, it would lead back to me. I didn't confront Ethan, didn't call Carly, didn't ask David why he signed the fake notarization. I didn't need their explanations. What I needed was proof. Clean. Cold. Legal. So I started building. I opened a new notebook, wrote everything I remembered, dates, phrases, tone of voice, even how long each pause lasted when I overheard them through the vent. Tessa helped me gather screenshots of every email Carly had ever sent me. We printed them, highlighted them, cross-referenced them. We called in another favor, an old friend of hers who used to specialize in estate fraud. The moment she heard the words post-surgery signature, she stopped us mid-sentence and said, that's coercion. If she was under medication, this could be criminal. I didn't cry. I didn't even shake. I just kept sorting, labeling, filing. The same way I used to sort bills, the same way I used to pack Ethan's lunch in little Ziploc bags with his favorite notes. Only this time, I wasn't saving anyone else. I was saving me. I made 2 copies of everything, one in a fireproof safe, and one I kept hidden inside a hollowed-out cookbook. And then, I sold the house. Yes. The lake house. The one they thought was theirs. A quiet listing, no public open house. Just a couple, young, newly married, who looked at that old cabin with wonder in their eyes. They paid in cash. $460,000, and I smiled the whole time at closing, not because of the money, but because I still could. I used part of the money to buy a small condo near the city library. Nothing fancy. 1 bedroom, white curtains, a little balcony with space for 2 flower pots. And for the first time in years, I bought myself a new teacup. Not a set, just one. Because I wasn't expecting company, I didn't make noise. I made moves, and by the time they realized I'd disappeared from the story they tried to write, I was already living a new one. 2 weeks after I sold the lake house, Ethan showed up at my door. No text, no warning, just a knock, like he hadn't spent the past year planning how to erase me. I stood behind the door a long time before opening it. When I did, I barely recognized him. He looked smaller, not physically, just hollow. His eyes were tired, his shoulders hunched. He held nothing in his hands. "Hi, Mom," he said. I didn't answer. I stepped aside. He walked in like he used to when he was 16, trying to act casual after failing a test. We sat at the table. He didn't touch the tea I poured, and then he said it. "I don't know who I am anymore." I believed that because the person who sat across from me was not the boy I raised. That boy used to ask me to check his closet for monsters. This man became one. I was scared, he said. Carly had plans. I thought if I just handled it quietly, if I got the house, we'd be set. He looked up, waiting for forgiveness. Or something like it, but I had nothing to offer. "You weren't scared?" I said calmly. "You were selfish. You didn't trip and fall into this. You built it on purpose." He didn't argue. He cried. I let him. And when he was done, I stood up, walked him to the door. He hesitated like he wanted to say more. But I was done carrying this story for both of us. So I placed my hand on his shoulder. Not as a mother. Not as a blessing. Just a closing gesture. And then I closed the door. Later that night, I took out the teacup I'd bought for myself, poured chamomile, sat on my little balcony as the city lights hummed below. No one knew what I'd done. No one clapped or called me brave. But for the first time in years, I felt whole. I had a deed in my name, silence, in my home, and nothing left I needed to prove. Have you ever walked away from someone you raised because staying meant losing yourself? If this story reminds you of your own, drop A in the comments. Let others know. You don't need to scream to win. Sometimes you just need to close the door and not open it again.